Well, good evening. Thank you for your patience. Obviously, a pretty rough traffic day out there, but we appreciate everybody fighting their way and getting here. I'm Chris Putnam. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Dallas Express News. For those of you that are not familiar with the Dallas Express, we are a independent, alternative source of local news here in Dallas-Fort Worth. We have 350,000 subscribers, all of which are totally free, which is, by the way, more than the Dallas Morning News and Star Telegram has combined in terms of digital subscribers. Yeah, thank you. We've experienced a lot of growth in the last year. Many of you know, like Joe Rogan's been using this as a source on his podcast, which has been fun. He actually said that the Dallas Express is like the #1 paper in the universe. Everybody's reading it. And then, of course, at the end of the year, we broke one of the biggest stories of the year outside of presidential assassinations, which was the story about the Fort Worth congressperson who had literally not been serving for 7 months and was found in a memory care center. And so that actually took us global. New York Post, New York Times, Washington Post. So it's been a really, really fun, exciting year for us. And this year is going to be interesting as well, obviously. Everything we do is free. What we ask you to do is just go to the website, give us your email address, and sign up for the daily newsletter. That is how we keep sponsors, donors, and advertisers interested in us, is by the number of newsletters we send a day. We send about 250,000 every day. And so that's what's important to us. Of course, if you'd like to be a donor, there's places to do that on the website as well, or advertise. That leads me to our sponsors, to thank our sponsors here today. First of all, we want to thank the folks here at Milo Butterfingers. So thank you guys for having us, Chris and Ian. Yeah, they donated this, so it's, when we don't have to pay, it's great. And then M&A Development, their president and CEO, Scott Theringer. They're a new sponsor of ours, and Scott's actually joining our advisory board, which we're excited about. And then Rigney Financial, which is based in Grapevine. Full-service financial services firm, advisory, insurance, estate planning, etc. So with that, let's get to these guys. Because I couldn't be more excited. This is an insane all-star panel to get all these guys here, right? So we'll start at the end. I think, that guy doesn't need much introduction, right? But Colonel West, of course, is a former U.S. congressman, and he is also the former chairman for the state party here in Texas, the state GOP, and of course now the chairman for Dallas County GOP. So welcome, Colonel West.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna need my glasses for a couple of these. So we also have in town, super famous influencer, right? Corey DeAngelis. He is, one of the preeminent school choice advocates in the country. Corey's a senior fellow at American Culture Project, visiting fellow of the American Institute of Economic Research. He's been labeled a school choice evangelist and been called the most effective school choice advocate since Milton Friedman. He's on Fox News a lot, appears in the Wall Street Journal, executive director of the Educational Freedom Institute, senior fellow at the Reason Foundation, adjunct scholar at Cato Institute. It's a lot of stuff, man. Board member at Liberty Justice Center and a senior at Accuracy of Media. Holds a PhD in education policy from the University of Arkansas. Is that a 4-year school?
Well, don't call me doctor. I'm not a real doctor. More like a Jill Biden doctor.
A national best-selling author of The Parent Revolution, Rescue Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. So welcome, Corey. Lynn Davenport is here with us also. She's an education researcher, lives in Dallas Lake Highlands with her husband, William, where they raised 3 kids. Lynn worked for Arthur Andersen as a recruiting manager in global IT services and business consulting practice before staying home to raise their kids. Travels and stays as an education analyst with Families Engaged for effective education to teach parents how to advocate and engage at the local and state level. She speaks out against experimental education technologies and shares the truth about government-regulated school choice. Lynn was elected to serve as a Republican precinct chair and served as a delegate at the state GOP convention. So welcome, Lynn. I guess I should have.
You don't have to read all. He's got like 3 paragraphs.
Yeah. No, so Nate is a state representative of House District 93, which is my previous district. Former pastor, founder of Liberty for Liberty and Justice, an organization dedicated to mobilizing the local church to see reformation in government, and serves as the director of operations for the Justice Reform and Anti-Human Trafficking organization based out of Fort Worth. So welcome, Nate.
Thank you.
And lastly, as soon as I find it, we have our good friend Russell Fish. So his bio is hilarious. What's the most important thing I should mention here, Russell?
It should be short. A poem. Don't believe
He wasn't born on a farm, but he grew up in one. His grandmother taught him how to read. Sold a Silicon Valley company, taught math and science in the projects, worked with Black Panther, analyzing
real Black Panther. Not these fake ones.
analyzing elementary school progress, broke TAS task cheating scandal, indicted every Austin ISD board member, sent assistant superintendent to prison for cheating, was an open records project co-founder, analyzed 10 years of DISD financial history, and sent the superintendent to prison for embezzlement. Taught a dozen waves from 4 to 12, 6 nationalities, reading, math, and computer programming, and with some Silicon Valley executives built several schools in the Kenyan bush and taught a math class. So welcome, Russell. All right, so this is not a debate. That's why I tell people this is a forum. It's going to be as conversational as possible, right? So we don't, other than a couple of leading questions, these folks haven't even heard kind of what we're interested in talking about. And I know some of their positions as it relates to school choice in the current legislation, but not all. And so we're just going to see where this goes. But let me start by asking you, the audience, this, like just show of hands. So how many of you here actually support some form of school choice? Right, so it's a pretty good mix, maybe 50-50 or 60-40. That's great. So first question to the panel. So 34 states, now have some form of school choice. Why is it taking Texas so long to take school choice legislation seriously, and why is it so contentious? And I guess we'll just for first one start with Nate and go down this way.
Sure. I'll speak just to the historical context of it. Texas is very well known to be someone who everyone says there's no unions in Texas. The problem with that is you've got AFT, Texas AFT, where even in their bio says, yes, there are unions in Texas. Why? Because we understand that there's a cabal of the monopoly of public education that wants to control our students and keep our kids locked inside of failed public schools. And so for all of history, we're looking at, in the state of Texas, we're looking at some Republicans. I like to say that there is a shortage of courage in the Texas House, and there's also a shortage of testosterone in the Texas House. And so even those who have courage don't have the ability to stand up and fight. And so I think what we're seeing for the first time is we're seeing a lot of Republicans stand up and say, hey, you know what? We kind of have a failed system right here. It's time to look at something that's going to give us options and get our kids options to get out of trapped failing schools, rather than just keep throwing money at the problem. Hey, let's actually figure out a way to provide competition. I've never seen an industry that did not get better after competition was introduced, and the public education system is no different in that. And so if there is a possibility for us to preserve the rights of traditional homeschool and private school families while still passing school choice, where they can have their tax money actually follow the student and go to the educational entity of the parent's choice, I think empowering parents is always the right choice. But to get back to your question of why I think it's taken so long, I think we've had a lack of courage in the Texas House. I think we've had a lack of motivation inside the Texas House. And I think what we found in 2020 during COVID was it was exposed at how corrupt, how woke some of these public ISD systems are. And so we're seeing accountability come into play for the first time, which is why this is a part of the conversation. There are great public schools and there are failing public schools, and a parent should not be trapped inside the failing ones.
Yeah, and to get on the teachers' unions, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck and calls itself a duck, it's probably a duck. So Texas does have teachers' unions fighting against school choice year after year. But guess what? They've overplayed their hand and awakened a sleeping giant. Parents who want more of a say in their kids' education. In the past 4 years alone, we've had more advancement on school choice than in the preceding 4 decades. We've had 13 states now, all led by Republican legislatures, go all in on school choice, passing Milton Friedman's vision of universal school choice. All families, regardless of income, background, or zip code, can take their children's taxpayer-funded education dollars to the education provider that works for them, of their choosing. That could be your public school. If you like your public school, Nate, you can keep your public school. For real this time, unlike with your doctor, Obama's such a liar. But the public schools do get better in response to competition. It's a rising tide that lifts all boats. But the real recipe for why we've had success is that families got to see what was happening in the classroom. Much like Nate said, during Zoom school, or what they were calling remote learning. It should have been called remotely learning. There wasn't a lot of learning going on. But families got to see the woke garbage in the government-run school system, not in all public schools, but it is widespread. We have a nationally representative survey that just came out from Education Next, finding that 36% of the high school students that were surveyed responded that their teachers said often or almost daily that the U.S. is a fundamentally racist country. We don't need that in the government-run school system. Conservatives have woken up, and the short answer to your question is that we've had too many fake Republicans in the Texas House that were endorsed by the teachers' unions. 21 of them joined all the Democrats. Gene Wu, James Tallarico, joined people like Beto O'Rourke, who went to private school himself, joined up with people like Randy Weingarten, who lobbied the CDC to make it more difficult to reopen schools in person, joined up with all these leftists and voted with those Democrats. You had 21 so-called Republicans do that last year, but guess what? The primaries happened. These conservative parents, who 80% of them supported school choice on the Texas ballot in the Republican primary, they kicked them out of office. 14 of them are gone. That never happens in primaries. A political earthquake unleashed in Texas, because families are finally paying attention. And now, Texas finally has the votes. It already passed the Senate for universal school choice in the House of Representatives. So we're going to join the party. We're not first, but we're pretty close. We're going to be the 14th state with universal school choice because we have the votes to get it done. Abbott's called it an emergency item. And look, if you're on Trump's side and Abbott's side, you're probably on the right side. If you're on Beto O'Rourke's side and Gene Wu, the chair of the Texas House Democrat side, and Kamala Harris's side, you're probably on the wrong side.
Thanks, Corey. I think Lynn's got some things to say.
She kept raising her mic a couple times. Like, I'm ready for this.
Are you done? So raise your hand if you went to public schools. When you were in public schools, did they call it a monopoly?
No.
And I'll tell you the reason they did not call it a monopoly is they introduced that term. You mentioned Milton Friedman. They introduced that term because it's a business term. It's a marketplace term. And the billionaires who are funding this movement, like Jeff Yass, that's never happened before. Jeff Yass.
Billionaires funding against
Excuse
the
me,
movement.
it's my turn. So
It's a free-flowing conversation.
I know, but I get to at least address Chris's question, which was about the reason why Texas has not passed school choice. And I'll tell you because we don't consider our public schools a monopoly. And I'm someone who's fought my local public schools. I fought Richardson ISD. I sued them for the mask mandates. So I'm not some blind cheerleader of the public schools. But we have measures in place where we can actually petition our government. We just don't have anybody showing up at the local level. I'm curious, when was the last time you've been to a school board meeting? Some of you.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, but back
Since
to
you addressed
but
me?
let me finish about Texas. So the rural public schools and those in the rural counties, they're holding the line because they don't have options outside of their public schools. And there's this notion that they introduce market forces, and that's a rising tide, as you said, lift all boats. Well, we tried that with charter schools in the 90s. And where are we now? Now we pay for two systems. And with the vouchers, we're going to pay for a third system. You think it drains one to fund the other? No, it actually drains us. Yep. We're going to add a new lane of education, and it will be taxpayer funded. That's it.
Yeah, I actually have a question for you, Lynn. So you mentioned rural Republicans, right? And I mean, isn't the reality of that those districts are on the receiving end of Robin Hood, which by the way, is the most socialistic form of governmental financing that exists in the entire country. And they're concerned about losing the revenue. I mean, that's really it, right?
Robin Hood, that's recapture that came in through the legislature in the 90s. Another redistribution of wealth, just like charter schools and now vouchers. So yes, we should abolish Robin Hood because that's where they take money away from the property wealthy districts, like my district, which is 60% free and reduced lunch. We're not property wealthy, but they take that money and they give it to other school districts in these rural communities.
Go ahead, Corey. Can I hit the rural thing really quickly before we move on? So the 9 most rural states in the country, including West Virginia, Maine, and Vermont, all have some form of private school scholarship programs already. So there hasn't been an impediment in other states that have rural areas. Florida has a lot of rural areas, and guess what? They have universal school choice too, and their representatives who represent those areas, they vote for school choice. You look at the latest polling from University of Houston that just came out like a couple weeks ago, they found 67% of Texans support school choice. And you look at rural versus urban, the rural voters are much more supportive of school choice than in suburban or urban areas. 71% of rural voters supported school choice. And guess what? The oldest voucher programs in the country actually come before Milton Friedman. They started in the late 1800s in Maine and Vermont. Why? Because they had such rural areas, they had 0 public schools in those areas. So what did they do? They figured out over 150 years ago in these locations, if you didn't have a lot of choices, that's an argument to expand opportunities, not to restrict them. They funded the student, not the system, gave them scholarships. You could take it to another public school if you like, but if not, you could take that to a private school or a religious school. And real quick, we have 11 studies out of Florida showing school choice competition does improve the public schools. 10 out of those 11 studies are positive. Florida, a couple decades ago, had some of the worst academic outcomes in the nation when it comes to math and reading on the nation's
Corey, thanks.
report.
Let's let Lynn respond.
And just real quick, they're number 1 according to U.S. News and World Report now on education as they've expanded school choice. And it's not a money issue. They spend 27% less than the national average. Competition works everywhere else. It works in higher ed and pre-K too, but it also well, you're gonna pass school choice this year too.
We didn't lead in this.
Can we define universal? Because universal to me is for all. And they'll say, oh, well, it's universal eligibility. But if you read the bill, which I brought, if you'd like to borrow it, or universal is not the case with this. So it's not universal.
It actually does.
It's
It
like
applies.
1 point, what?
It does apply. Universal eligibility.
Yeah, but there's not enough money to give it to everybody.
Oh,
There's,
that's accurate.
Well,
And it
yeah.
actually
It's
is
not
the
universal
answer
and it's
when people
tiered.
say that we are trying to defund public education. The irony in that is we're actually allocating $96 billion inside of this year's budget to go towards public education, all the while $1 billion for ESAs. And the reason we're doing that is because it's going to go down, even at $1 billion, as the largest introduction to universal education freedom in the United States of America because the program grows. Why? Because the money should follow the student. I'd love to just address one more thing, and that was you saying, when was the last time we've been in a school board meeting? It's actually how I got my start, showing up to school board meetings for my kids, recognizing that we didn't make enough money to put our kids in private school. And in the process of that, we began to get 3 jobs, me and my wife, doing Uber, whatever it took, or DoorDash, to be able to make the money to put our kids in private school. The problem is we have kids that are trapped in failing schools. And so when I hear the argument that says every kid has school choice in Texas, it's offensive to me because there are children, and hear me, they're saying, oh, wait, that's equity, Nate, equal outcomes. No, it's equal opportunity. We want every child to have an equal opportunity at a quality education. And right now, if you live in Fort Worth ISD, you do not have quality education. And yes, should we show up to those board meetings and change it? We absolutely should. And yes, should we show up and have our voice heard? And should we stand up for our kids? Yes. But at the end of the day, there are kids that are being struggled
Let's
in the
let
middle
Lynn
of their
respond.
Fort Worth ISD, and we have to give them education power.
Go ahead, Lynn.
So how survey says, okay, so we can spout off a bazillion surveys, but those are all stacked and they're loaded, and you can get whatever
All
result.
of them, University of Texas, Austin. But
You know,
see,
but here's the thing, Corey.
but that's just wrong.
Corey, I'm a
Are they
parent.
all wrong?
Let-
Every single
Let's allow
survey?
folks to finish.
Anyway, so the surveys, but forget the surveys. Okay, well, let's go on something else that's more tangible. So, what is the problem that we're trying to solve here? Think about it. And does school choice solve that for the 5.4 million children who are in failing schools or in public schools? And remember, before No Child Left Behind, we used to fail students. Now we fail schools. So you have to start with the federal legislation and the state legislation that has led us to the place where we are. And that has been all from my party, the Republican Party, that has been leading our state. And the governor has been there since 2015. Yeah, 2015. And then he appointed our education commissioner, Mike Morath, has been there since 2016. So we are not solving any problems with school choice vouchers. And the money doesn't follow the child. It follows it into the comptroller's office for a banking scheme. So you say fund students, not systems. Well, I would agree. We need to be funding our students. And our local level is not doing a good job of being fiduciaries and good stewards of that money. But that's something that we need to shine a light on. But start with the mothership, and that's the TEA. And then you can deal with the 1,200 school districts. But we've got to start with all the money that's being laundered through the government, through the Texas Education Agency. That's why we've never fixed anything, because we've never tried. All we do when we go to the legislature is try and talk about school choice. It sucks all the energy out of the room.
So I wanted to obviously give Russell and Colonel
I'm
Weston an
enjoying
opportunity.
watching the white people fight. I really am. This is like a
I
Black
mean,
History Month
I had a feeling it was going to be a little bit animated. So the original question, Russell, is to you. Why did it take so long to seriously consider it, and why is it so contentious?
Okay.
You picked a good question.
You can use mine, Russell.
What? Here. Would you hang on to that, please?
Yes, I'm happy.
Thank you, sir. Before I came tonight, about 2 hours ago, I had a conversation with Kent Grusendorf. Well, you said, why is it taking so long? In 1992, we had the first school choice bill, and that is how I met Kent. I brought the superintendent from Austin ISD to testify before his committee. We lost by 1 vote. That was where it started. Now, I heard some people talking about the Republicans that aren't really Republicans. We had rhinos back then. The Democrats really controlled everything. And also, the labor unions play really dirty. And those of you that have not been on the inside, you probably haven't seen it. But they play to win. They don't care who they hurt. And I'm gonna give back the rest of my time to the Colonel.
Give my microphone.
Succinct. That's how we should all be.
You know, I think I might be the oldest guy up here. But this is the thing. Think about Dwight Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex. And then I think we saw during COVID the medical-industrial complex. Now what we have is an educational-industrial complex. It was not too long ago, there was an agency called HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare. The teachers' unions went to Jimmy Carter, and all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you get a separate entity called the Department of Education. This is not an old industry, an old agency, is relatively new. And so what I think the problem is that we have transferred so much of this issue called education into the hands of government, into the hands of bureaucrats. And look, I grew up in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia. If you were to tell my parents they didn't have school choice, they'd come down from heaven right now and slap you, because they chose to send me to Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic School in that neighborhood where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. grew up. They did not send me to 2 public schools that were there because they wanted me to have a better education. When I retired from the military, we lived down in South Florida. My wife and I, we made the choice of where our daughters should be sent. So I think first and foremost, we need to define these 2 words, school choice, because I get sick and tired of us having an individual right, freedom, and liberty, and then we have to go and, quote unquote, beg someone else to give it to us. We have that choice. Now, what are we really talking about? I think we're talking about educational
Money.
freedom. I think we're talking about enabling parents to be able to go out and make the best possible decisions for their child, and the government get out of the way. That's why I don't think we should have vouchers. I think we should have the flexible education savings accounts. You know, we had this thing called 529 education accounts, but guess what? It was Barack Obama who took that away. So we have all of these things in place, but those people that want to control it take that power away. Now, what I'd like to do is to try to get us on the same sheet of music. I'm not a real smart guy. Y'all know I used to jump out of airplanes like Russell. Parents' rights, plank 84, and this is from the Republican Party of Texas platform, page 15. School choice. We support further empowering, I would say enabling, all Texas families to choose from public, private, charter, or homeschool options for their children's education and funding, which shall follow the student with no strings attached. We oppose regulations on homeschooling or the curriculum of private or religious schools and believe a constitutional amendment should be adopted accordingly. In lieu of funding, citizens may use property tax exemptions. In other words, that's how we should do this, by tax credits. Now, this is what SB 2 says, and this is a complete contradiction to what the platform says. SB 2, the bill states, money received under the program may be used only for the following education-related expenses occurred by a participating child, get this, at a pre-approved education service provider or vendor of educational products. Texas Comptroller Glenn Hagar, in effect, he becomes the new headmaster of students enrolled in a quote-unquote school choice program. That's not school choice, if you ask me, and I think that's the problem. We need to define what those two words mean. We've done a real crappy job of that in the state of Texas and all across the United States.
Those bills are laden with strings. Senate Bill 2, it doesn't matter. Now they have House Bill 3, which is the most recent one. But the thing is the governor won't sign a bill that doesn't have strings. He's explicitly said that. And I'm really disgusted by the legislators who champion these bad bills. And then they'll say after the fact, oh yeah, that was a HB1 of last session. That was a terrible bill. Well, why'd you support it? We have to speak up. And you know, the thing is, there are people who have proposed a clean bill, a school choice bill, where it would be either an exemption, where the money never leaves your house to be laundered through the government and tell you how you educate your child. But those things won't be signed by the governor because he's part of the problem. But instead of going after him and telling him what we want, we bow to him and go sit in his office and beg for his love and his, I mean, you know, and he doesn't have any power without us bringing him those bills for him to sign. Don't bring him bad bills.
Yeah.
Lynn, could you actually, Lynn,
Yes.
could you actually detail a couple of the strings for, give a couple of examples?
Yes. Okay. So they're in the bills. They have these Certified Educational Assistance Organization, CEAO, and that's a vendor within the bill. These vendors can collect up to 10% depending on the state. And those, so when we say strings, that's a very generic term, but what it means is if you take the money, then you have to do this, jump through this hoop. So there's accountability measures. The governor calls it, he said accountability. What he means by that is the test. So now that may not be in a current bill, but I guarantee you by the end it will be in a bill. So that means your private or homeschool is going to have to do either a norm reference test or the state test. In Tennessee, it's the state test.
Would you support the bill if it wasn't in it?
No. I
So
wouldn't.
then why are you bringing all this other stuff up?
Because
if
there are
you're
people
against
who
it either
would.
way?
I know. I am against it either way because I want to fix what's happening in our public schools. That'll never happen if
But
we
why
keep
can't
having.
we do both? Why can't we go to the school board meetings, push for reform in the public schools, which I think we should still do that, but we should also have an escape hatch if your kid's getting bullied or if there's if they're going around the CRT ban, which they have in Texas all across the state. We have undercover video from an organization called Accuracy in Media where they're saying we're still gonna do CRT, but we're gonna call it social emotional learning. We're
That
gonna
was
call
my
it
district, by the way.
Yeah, so I think
Richardson.
we might agree on having
We
indoctrination
agree on the
out of the
problem,
public schools,
but we don't agree on the solution. So year after year, we never have what?
but let's say we keep going to the school
You want the
board
solution?
meeting.
that what you said? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Pay and train the teachers with the money saved on the wasteful and harmful technologies, the vendor bills, the state tests, which we pay $388 million, plus a Pearson, Cambium. There's AI in the test. We are paying vendors, consultants, contractors. All of that's running through the TEA.
So more
Lynn,
Yeah.
real quick, I totally support getting rid of the STAR test. We're going to do that this session if I had to guess.
Here's
what I would say. So back
What to
I want to
replace
just
it?
address what Lieutenant Colonel Alan West said, because I think I love that you read the RBT platform, and I think it's important to note that our current RBT chairman that oversaw that process is currently supporting both of those bills coming out of the Senate and the House. And let me just address this, and I'm just gonna finish my statement. I tried to be quiet as long as you could. So ultimately, when we talk about HB3, when we talk about SB2, one of the things that you have to look at is that the argument that, well, Nate, I'm concerned that we're going to have government intervention on these ESAs. I'd like to address it in two parts. Number one, and first and foremost, I would actually totally support the tax credits. Is great, but up within this bill, just let me finish. Within this bill, what we're looking at right now is an argument that says, well, you're about to impose government intervention on my homeschool family or on a private school family. And the reality is it's just not the case, because what this bill does is it actually creates a new avenue called an ESA recipient. It has nothing to do with a traditional homeschool or private school student. In fact, they can just say no to that. And so looking at it, this new ESA recipient, this is why on page 26 of the bill in HB3, what we look at right here is where we say, hey, we're going to make sure that we do not take away your religious freedom. We are going to make sure that we do not mess with the hiring and firing standards of your private school. We're going to make sure that if you're taking a norm reference test in a private school, well, guess what? You already were if you were a part of an accredited private school. And so I know you're like foaming at the mouth to try and come back at me on this, but I'd just like to end with this. So here we've got families that are trapped in failed ISD. And I'm going to use Fort Worth ISD again, because I think this is an important note to make, is that we have families that are trapped in Fort Worth ISD. They literally can't afford another option. Mom is working overnight. Maybe it's a single mom. And now you put her in a position where you're saying, hey, because we're so scared of this government intervention that on page 26 of HB3 it says they can't do, because we're so scared, we don't want you to have the opportunity to have an ESA. We would rather you be trapped in a public school where there is most certainly government intervention happening to your child every single day. And so the argument falls on deaf ears when you're dealing with students who are in a failed public school system that is leading, get this, not just to failed education rates, but higher incarceration rates, where we're looking at a system where we're not producing the best in Texas for the future of Texas. And so I absolutely support the bill. And I think if you look at the track record, I think Corey talked about this earlier, but you have President Trump who supports this. You have J.D. Vance who supports this. And look at the other side. You have Kamala Harris. You have Hillary Clinton. It's very clear. You have James Tallarico, who is a far leftist inside of the Texas House, who is the greatest enemy to this bill. And for some reason, it's difficult for people to see which side conservatives are on this bill. And so I think it's important to look at the points and the actual facts.
This current legislature can't bind a future legislature. Just
well,
like
that's
a
true on all things. That's true on all things. So we could outlaw every right. We could outlaw every right next session, even without an ESA bill.
So you can put all of this stuff in there and say that you're going to protect, but a future legislature or a Democrat governor can change that. But more importantly,
that's true
we
with
have
or without this bill.
I know,
Democrats can come in charge, and they can come
regulate
regulate private and home education if they were to do so. And it'd be great if we fight back against those things. Politics is all about organized interest, pushing for what. Are you a panelist too? Should we get an extra
That's
chair?
okay.
She's just talking the
just
entire
finish your thought real
time.
quick, Corey, and let's go back to Liz.
But
what I was going to finish
talking the
with is
entire time.
FERPA. We have
But-
FERPA
Folks.
rights, we have SIPA rights, we have IDA rights. We're violating all of those, and you're saying that they're going to protect us with this bill? I don't think that's going to happen. And there's also a bunch of details that I would love for you to address is on data collection and the information that will be collected by the comptroller and the government in this bill here. It's terrible.
I just wanted to finish my thoughts real quick before we got in the side conversation. But look at the states that have universal school choice versus the ones who don't. Look at the Homeschool Legal Defense Association's map. They have the different colors for homeschool freedom. Look at states like New York, Rhode Island, They have the worst homeschooling laws on the books when it comes to personal freedom. Guess what? They have 0 school choice programs. Look on the other hand. Look at Oklahoma, Iowa, universal school choice, and the most homeschooling freedom. Look at places like Ohio. They passed universal school choice the same session that they deregulated homeschooling. So if you can pass school choice, get more people on your side, build a broader coalition to fight back against authoritarians in office, you're going to win and fight back against any calls for regulation in the future. If you don't do anything, if you make perfect the enemy of the good, well, guess what? You don't have as big of a coalition to fight back when, I hope this doesn't happen, but if Democrats were to get in charge in the future, they could regulate private and home. Look, they're doing this in Illinois right now. They have a bill
Colonel.
to regulate homeschooling, and they don't have private school choice.
Can I just interject something? I hate to say it, but the Democrats are in charge of the Texas State House.
That's true.
And that's why we blocked school choice before.
So you introduced a couple of different topics. So I want to focus on one that not a lot of people talk about, and I'm going to direct this one to you, Russell. What I hear increasingly, and I mean, we do a story about every other day on some sexual predator, within our public schools.
Talk to Nate on that.
Well,
He's the hero of the day.
Well,
I do have a bill to fix.
the question is this: like, we actually started doing an investigation on that. Our friend Kellen here, on the scope and scale of the problem, and it's huge. It's actually just tremendous. So I wanted you to maybe detail a little bit about what you've learned, and not only what you've learned, but what are the solutions to this problem that just seems to be absolutely getting out of control.
The Open Records Project, the very first project we did 28 years ago was we published the state sex offender.
Like your singer.
We published the state sex offender registry, and here we are returning to our roots. 25 years later, we had a series of whistleblower parents that came to us and said, "Why don't you guys look at what's going on inside?" Particularly the elementary schools in some of these districts. And we looked at about a dozen where we went deep, and in some cases we put people inside to find out what was going on. And what we found was that there's a system that has been created that allows teachers who have sex with kids to avoid the criminal justice system. Now, the bill that Nate filed is designed to fix a problem that Levi Fuller in the Attorney General's office brought to our attention. And that is that there is a statute in Texas law that if you are a teacher, the superintendent does not need to report you to the police department if you have sex with kids.
And so that bill essentially says you can either report it to the police department or the TEA. And so we have a bill that removes the or and puts and they must report it to the police every single time there's abuse.
But guys, what is it about these roles or these jobs? It's just because they're working with children? Like, why are we attracting so many of these sex criminals in our public schools?
Okay.
Why are we attracted?
Why do public schools? The same reason that the Boy Scouts did. That's where the kids are. I mean, these are really sick people. And after we finish, I brought some of the things that we've gotten from parents. These are people that are mentally ill, and they. When they approach a 5 or 6 year old or a 7-year-old that trusts them, that child is damaged for the rest of their life. And until you have interviewed those people like we have, you do not. It is easy to say, "Oh, that's no big deal. They will forget." No, they don't. They never trust another adult, including their parents.
Russell, is school choice going to solve this problem? We have pedophiles in our churches and Boy Scouts in our
It's not going to solve
summer
everything,
camps.
but it could help, right? If you know that there's a problem like this in your public school or private school, if you could transfer to another school that doesn't have that problem.
Well,
not
you
all
can
private schools
transfer
are perfect.
now.
Not all public schools are
Let's
perfect.
let
we have
Lynn finish
Pell
it up.
Grants. You can transfer now.
The difference is public schools have a get out of jail free law.
And the
There-
DEA is covering them up and changing them to unknown. You told me
The-
that. There are people. Why is that not?
There's a civil war going on inside TEA. We know because we have whistleblowers that call us. We have whistleblowers inside SBEC. We have whistleblowers inside the Attorney General. Everybody knows there are problems. It's like the Epstein Diddy thing. Everybody knew that there was stuff going on, but people were afraid to talk. That exists inside government today.
Why is our governor not doing anything about that? Why are we not
He's
putting
the only
pressure
one
on
I
him?
haven't talked to.
The legislators are going and sitting in his office one after the other, like they're sitting on Santa's lap, talking about school choice. And yes, Governor, I'll sign on with your bill. Instead of saying, Governor, we have this huge problem. We've got pedophiles that are
I have a legitimate
changing.
question. But since you've accused us of going and sitting on Santa's lap, I might as well address it. Do you think that that's the only thing we have conversations with Governor Abbott about, or do you
It's the
think
only thing
that
he
we-
tweets about. I don't know.
Well, that's fair, but when was the last time you had a conversation with the governor about it? You didn't.
has not
And so at the end of the
returned my
day,
calls.
you need to know that we talked to the governor about all sorts of issues. I don't know if you've known this, but of the emergency items, that was one. He also talked about other items as well that we're addressing, such as water shortage, you name it. So absolutely we've talked to the governor about ending the sexualization of kids. In fact, while I was in the office, one of the main topics of conversation wasn't school choice. It was actually banning DEI in K through 12 education. And so we are working very, very, very hard. But at the end of the day, these types of back and forths where you're just accusing are not helpful to the conversation.
I have evidence, and the governor has appointed a DEI king, Todd Williams, to 4 boards and commissions with the state education funding. It literally says DEI on his Commit Partnership website. Why is the governor appointing Democrats to his positions?
Do you
We talk
support-
about
do you
banning
support
Democrat
the governor's
chairs.
push to ban DEI in public schools? I think we can agree there.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is
I'm just trying to
it's
find
already
some common
there.
ground.
Let's get it
Yeah.
across the finish line. Advocate for it.
That DEI director that you caught on video, yes, I advocated for getting rid of the Richardson. Get rid of the DEI department. No, I'm not against you on that. What I'm saying is it's hypocritical when our governor literally appoints DEI kings to his commissions to steer funding.
And look, one of the things I think we need to ask is, when I was in combat, I told soldiers you got to understand your task and purpose, your what and your why every single day. So I'd like for us to have a discussion. What's the task and purpose of TEA?
Well, I joined
No,
author.
Laundering money?
Hold on. Let's start down here and we'll work our way
I
down.
joined authored a bill with Andy Hopper to abolish the TEA last week. So my whole purpose is I don't believe it's necessary. I don't think that they should have a role. And I actually believe we need to get away from the bureaucratic state.
Yeah.
Well, school choice is not through the TEA, just so you know.
What did he say?
It's not through the TEA. It's not through the TEA.
Is listed in the bill. Yeah, it's in his bill.
But, and Chris,
Go ahead.
okay. And Chris, I think another thing, because we're talking about legislation, Lynn brought up a great point in that, what happens if? I mean, we say that we don't believe it can happen, but it could.
Yeah.
How can we maybe get this as a constitutional amendment, which means that it's harder for someone to come later on than just passing legislation? And definitely we don't want it by executive order. But is it possible maybe that we could get it as a constitutional amendment and well-defined constitutional amendment?
You'd have to put it on the ballot. Right?
It would have to, well, yes, it'd have to be on the ballot, which I actually believe it would pass on the ballot. The problem is not passing on the ballot, it's getting it to the ballot. And right now, I think you said it best, we had 30 Republicans that partnered with Dustin Burrows in the Democrat caucus in order to win the speakership. And so the idea of getting 100 votes to walk on a constitutional amendment is going to be very challenging. I obviously will support it.
You would need Democrat support too, right? Yeah.
All right, I want to shift to funding. Actually, a subject that Lynn brought up, and this is a question that I always ask, people on either side of this issue, which is, what number do you agree on that we're actually spending, per student? What number are we spending per student in Texas when you factor in the debt service, all of it, M&O, everything, right? I mean, the number that I've seen is as high as 50,000. You hear 20,000. So what is it, and then what's the right number? And let's start down at the end with Colonel West.
Well, I don't think it's so much about the number. I think it's about the return on investment. Because when you look at the number being at 20,000 or 50,000, we have young people that aren't reading and doing math at grade level. And when you listen to some of the things, AI, data centers that want to come here, we should be preparing our young people for that. And I think that is the real failure, is that we don't have an education system that allows our kids to be able to go out and get that quality education that prepares them to be good and productive members of the economy and the technology that we have here in Texas. So I think that what we have to start looking at is the return on investment of what we're doing. And again, that's why I think that we should turn that over to a parent. That parent to be able to say that these dollars I'm earmarking out, you can't touch it. It is going for me to get my kid educated. Now, I don't know how many people here have heard of the Salesmanship Club here in Dallas. Look up the Salesmanship Club. They're the guys that put on the Byron Nelson. They have a school down there called the Momentous Institute. I've been down and toured that school. I mean, we need to start looking at how we can get corporations involved in this also, so that they can sponsor scholarships and they can start developing that next generation of intellect with our kids. Because now is the time to think out of the box. And Booker T. Washington, I was just down in Tuskegee 2 weeks ago for a commemorative event. I think we need to go back and everyone read the autobiography of Booker T. Washington. And understand when he started that institution, he had 3 points: education, entrepreneurship, and self-reliance. We don't have a system of education anymore. We have a system of indoctrination. We have too much government bureaucracy. You've usurped the rights of parents, and you're thinking that parents need to come back and beg the government to get those rights back. So we can talk about the numbers, but the real numbers is that we are failing our kids.
Well, one thing that I study that Alice Linehan, who's in the audience, has helped me understand is the federal intrusion that has come. There's no constitutional justification for the federal Department of Education, which Trump is saying he's going to abolish. But there are bills that are in place that need to be repealed before that happens. And you mentioned the business interests. Well, the businesses are involved, but it's not in the way that you say. Our kids are viewed as a commodity, and the data that's collected on them, the contracts that come through the state and the local education systems, they view our children as investment vehicles for profit. You can't make money on time-tested reading strategies or math strategies. So the solution is to return to what works, which is how we learn to read, time-tested strategies, and bring back the retired teachers who were pushed out because they refused to do what's happening, and go back to those old school strategies for teaching kids to read. But you'd have to eliminate so many of the contracts and the bills that have come before the legislature under Republican legislatures. You should see the layers and layers of bureaucracy. But to answer your question, it's $6,100 is the basic allotment. That's what
from the state.
Yeah, no, and I'll finish. But the problem is that you've got the bond debt that is coming from the local level in order to offset the lack of the basic allotment being lifted and risen in the legislature. So what they're doing is they're gouging the taxpayers through the bond debt and the spending and other buckets, while the basic allotment has stayed the same. So I think we should raise the basic allotment, but I don't think that we should be gouging the taxpayers and doing the recapture, which I mentioned.
Can I speak to?
Yeah, well, I thought we were going back down this way.
Lynn, were you finished? Lynn, were you finished?
Yep.
Were you finished, Lynn?
Oh, Russell, do you want to chime in?
Yeah. Teaching reading is really easy. I mean, we do it in Africa. And I at one point, I thought about doing a television show, Are You As Smart as an African? Because in the middle of, within 20 miles of the equator, these kids are kicking ass. And you look at them, and they look like the kids in South Dallas, but for some reason, they're able to do algebra and geometry and so forth. And the kids in South Dallas can, barely, load a 9mm. So, and a large part of that is the when the British ran Kenya until they got kicked out, they left their curriculum, they left Robert's Rules of Order, they left the Episcopal Church, they left all these wonderful things. And now, 40 years later, the citizens of Kenya are looking back and saying, wow, we got a lot of stuff. And particularly that curriculum. That curriculum is back to basics. It's phonics. It's, drill and kill on your math. And anyway, I thought that would be a cool show, and maybe we'll do it one day.
So the total amount we spend per student, according to TEA's latest numbers, is about $17,000 per student per year in the government-run schools. Charters, I think, get a little less on average, and the bill that is in the House right now is 85% of the state and local funding. So it's tied to public school amounts, but it's significantly less. I think that comes out to about like $10,000 or $11,000 per student per year. So you can save taxpayer money that way, have a lower incentive for localities to increase bonds every year if they're keeping some of that funding in the public school already and losing the student. I think Lynn and I found one more thing that we agree on, which is abolishing the federal Department of Education. And Trump did make that one of his main campaign issues. And there is a bill in Congress to do that right now from Senator Mike Rounds out of South Dakota, Republican, to abolish the Department of Education. So I think we can agree that's an unconstitutional waste of time and money. It started in 1979 as a payoff by Jimmy Carter to the teachers' unions. And we'd have more local control. That money would go back to the states. It's the Returning Education to the States Act. So I think that would be a step in the right direction. And I think that's all I was going to hit on.
Yeah, I mean, so we're talking about, again, out of this last biennium, $350 billion budget, $96 billion is about to be used on public education funding. On top of that, I love the number you used, 16 or so. Go ahead.
That's about 50% higher than average private school tuition. The average is like $10,000, $11,000.
Correct. It is a fallacy to say that we are a low state in education funding when in total funding, we're actually number 3 in the country for funding public schools. And so looking at that 17,000 number, it also does not account for the federal funding that's coming in. That's where the 40 to 50,000 per student comes in. Not to mention that includes your transportation, all you can imagine, which is the comedy when people say that 10,000 for an ESA is too much, when in reality they don't have taxing authority. They can't pass bonds at a private school, and nor should they be able to. And so looking at this, I actually believe that in many ways, many public schools are overfunded. Now, with that, we can also take into account recapture. That's a huge issue, which is why I filed a bill to make sure every dollar for recapture that does not go to a low-income school returns back to the district. In some cases, like at Carroll ISD, they lost over $30 million in recapture. My district, Keller ISD, lost $4 million in recapture. So absolutely, those are treated differently.
Why do we not just have a bill that repeals Robin Hood entirely?
I also am carrying that bill this session as well to
What'd you
repeal
say?
Robin Hood
Sorry,
completely. And so what we're trying to do is hit this from many different angles. So as far as school financing, you got a Fort Worth ISD that is a recipient of recapture that is receiving, and many of them are. And so they're receiving funds for these districts, and the reality is we need to look at it across the board and look at public school funding altogether. But to say that an ESA is making more money to go for a child than what public schools get is just simply not true.
I've got...
And one more thing,
go
we
ahead.
should look at where the money goes over time. Since 1970, we've increased per student funding in Texas public schools by about 160% inflation adjusted. Teacher salaries have only gone up by like 10% over that period. So
a lot of
the
going to
teachers
admin.
are I kind of feel bad for them when they're not seeing the salaries going up, but it's going towards administrative bloat. We have like half a dozen superintendents making more than the president of the United States, over $400,000 a year.
We don't have
And-
collective bargaining in Texas.
Well, yeah, but we do have unions. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck and calls
They don't
itself
have collective
a duck,
bargaining in
it's
Texas.
Yeah, so other states don't either. But
Do
right.
we have there was a program when I retired, it's called Troops to Teachers. Do we have that program here in Texas? Anybody know?
I don't think so.
I mean, it's a great program. What it did is it looked at, recently retired officers and senior non-commissioned officers. And, these are people that have had lots of responsibility, a lot of education, and gave them the opportunities to come back into high schools, especially some of your tougher inner city high schools, to be teachers. So I think that's something maybe we could look at is a Troops to Teachers program.
I've got one final question. Oh, go ahead, Lynn.
I was just going to make a comment about funding. In the new bill, in the House Bill 3, it has up to $30,000, and they put special needs kids first, which sounds good. But one of the gentlemen, you mentioned Kent Grusendorf, he's a former legislator, and he set the special ed cap that was in 2004. It was an illegal, arbitrary cap to cap the number of children who were served with special needs in Texas schools. You can look that up. And so now he's back to push school choice vouchers for special needs kids. I find that ironic. The people who broke the system decades ago, the special needs was 2004, so that was just 20 years ago. They come back to remake the system, pushing vouchers. I think that should be called out.
All right. So my actually last question is for you, Lynn, and I want to drill down on a kind of a practical use case, one that Holly and I have been round and round about for years. Because there's been a lot of talk about Fort Worth ISD, right? So for those of you who are from Dallas, Fort Worth ISD is right now generally recognized as the worst urban, public school district in the state. And it's a tremendous handicap for the city of Fort Worth because they have this just complete inability to recruit high-paying, white-collar tech and finance jobs to the city. They all go to the suburbs. Dallas gets away with it because the Park Cities is here. And, people go live there, even if they're, officing in Dallas proper. Politically, like we talk about local control, and I think most conservatives agree that local control is the best way to go. But when you're dealing with a system that's fundamentally flawed, in other words, in Fort Worth ISD, the trustees have no at-large seats. They're all gerrymandered, and politically, it's impossible to remove a lot of these people or get them changed out. We've seen that, not because of the lack of work by people like Holly and Carlos back in the day. Tried really, really hard, to reform those districts. And while the district has improved, there's no way to fundamentally reform it like you could do in Keller, or like you could do in Grapevine, Colleyville, or like has happened in South Lake Keller. And the problem, as we know, particularly with our economically disadvantaged communities, is in the bigger cities. So how do you solve that problem without school choice?
Well, first, you have to understand how we got here. And the system, I've said this before, that it was broken on purpose. So if you look at No Child Left Behind, one thing that came out when I was talking about the marketplace, so what came out of that bill, it set up a marketplace for reading software companies like iStation. So they piloted that in Fort Worth and Richardson and Terrell and Houston ISD. They were all high-performing districts at the time. This was in 2003 after the bill was signed that they piloted it. So they've been experimenting on the children with these reading softwares and the experimental learning strategies.
But Lynn, what I'm talking about, that's understood. But what I'm talking about is if you can't unelect some of these people that are just entrenched in these gerrymandered districts to affect change, then how do you?
Yeah, so the governor, he went after his own party. He could go after those seats and pluck off the Democrats and use his war chest to get rid of people on the school board.
He can go after his own party because people in his own party are going to listen to him. Democrats aren't going to listen to Governor Abbott.
No, that'll be a negative.
That's not what I said. Use his war chest to go after those seats. Fund people.
The moment that those dollars have Greg Abbott's name on it, no Democrats voting for that candidate.
Well, then get Jeff Yass to do it. I don't know.
It's not.
Well,
Yeah, but look, I think if we can agree that there are problems in these schools, I think Lynn just alluded to that, well, then why trap those same kids in those schools and not let them go somewhere else? I think school choice has to be not the only solution, but part of it. If we have just been banging our head against the wall, trying to fix these schools for decades, they're not getting any better. Why should those kids be trapped there any longer? We should give them at least a chance to go somewhere else. And that's not the only solution. I'm willing to work with you guys on some other solutions, like reforming the whatever TEA or the school
What they're
board or the
learning,
testing.
how they're learning, and who's profiting. Yes.
Go ahead, Colonel.
Ron DeSantis in his first election was running against a black mayor of Tallahassee. Barely won that election, less than 1%. When they went and did the exit polling, what was the winning issue for Ron DeSantis?
School choice.
School
Because what
choice moms tipped the governor's race in Florida
What
was
he
the Wall Street Journal
said,
headline.
there were black mothers who crossed over and said, I want a better education opportunity for my child. And I think we do a piss poor job of going into the inner city communities and creating that wedge. I mean, when Bill de Blasio came out against Success Academy, one of the great charter schools up there in New York City, the black parents and moms took to the streets. So I think that we have to have a really good marketing and communication strategy. And I always say this, we got to get on the other side of the Trinity River here in Dallas. We don't do that. This is a winning issue for us. The Democrat Party has destroyed the black community.
Yep.
The Democrat Party has destroyed the family. They have destroyed education opportunities. I started off by telling you that I went to a Catholic school in my neighborhood. That school today is a community center. Okay, it is no longer existing. That's what happens when we allow the other side and we allow government bureaucrats to come in and destroy future opportunities for especially young kids in inner cities.
In that Florida race, his opponent, Andrew Gillum, they were neck and neck. And he said he was going to get rid of the scholarship program that was already benefiting over 100,000 kids at the time.
Barack
Disproportionately
Obama
low
did the same
income.
thing in D.C.
Exactly. Non-white kids. And what happened on the exit poll? They showed that black moms came out in force for DeSantis, putting him over the edge to win. And guess what? Florida went from a purplish state to now they have super majorities in both chambers. This is one way Republicans can make inroads with communities that they didn't get votes from before, and you can expand. This happened in West Virginia, too. After they passed universal school choice, they now have super majorities in both chambers of Republicans.
Lynn, I want you to have the last word here.
Florida's NAEP scores are down. That just came out.
Everybody's NAEP scores are down, whether you have school choice or not.
I have one
dumbing
question
down the nation.
that maybe you can answer, maybe you can't, because I'm sure it's different district to district. But we had Dallas Hero here on the city side, a citizens referendum basically that allowed the citizens to involve themselves in changing the charter amendments and increasing public safety. Is there something like that in these school districts' charters? Where, like, back to the idea of a constitutional amendment, just like be able to put something on the ballot. The citizens put something on the ballot to reform these districts without having to rely on these individual gerrymandered fiefdoms and trying to spend all the time and money to displace them. Do we know? I mean, it's probably something we ought to all investigate. If we don't.
We just don't have a supermajority. Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
So I'll say it like this, and I think it's important, especially for some of the people that are in the crowd right now and those watching who are in specifically Fort Worth ISD, and I say it so much because I live in Fort Worth. And so ultimately when we look at Fort Worth ISD, I see people in the crowd that have fought for your kids. You fought in the school district. The reality is I also watched at those same rallies that I showed up to when I would speak, they wouldn't even look at me. I'm an elected official, not just a parent. They wouldn't even look at you. They won't take your calls. They won't take your meetings. Many of them, some will, but many of them won't. And the reality is that the only way we get their attention is if their funding is now tied to a choice that parent has, not for an education bureaucrat to be able to say, hey, it doesn't matter if that student's coming to our school or not right now, we're gonna keep getting funding. Look, if there is no competition with school choice, then we are going to continue down this rabbit hole of failed ISDs inside of Texas, and we must pass this.
Last words, guys.
What did the National School Boards Association do during the COVID era? They labeled parents as domestic terrorists. They even had the FBI create a threat tag specifically for parents protesting at school board meetings because they were upset about mask mandates, they were upset about critical race theory, and they didn't want to listen to these parents because they had no power in that relationship. So they tried to bully and silence them into submission. Well, guess what? When the funding follows the student, like Nate was saying, they now have an incentive to listen to you, to think of you as a customer, to think of you as a partner in the relationship, not an enemy. It's almost counterintuitive. When you have more school choice, you're less likely to need to exercise that choice because your public school will listen, reform, and do a better job. It's a rising tide that lifts all boats.
Lynn.
Once your private school, your home school accepts the money, they are no longer private.
It's all voluntary. You don't have to take the money.
The money follows the child, so do the strings. But it runs through the government.
You're
Why
just
would you
ignoring
leave the
the
government
bill.
schools
You just ignore the bill.
only to have government-regulated school choice. I don't think you understand. It's running through the same government that broke the system.
Russell, final words?
It's easy to create, particularly in elementary school, and I'm just astounded because we have 24 of them in Kenya. I helped found one in California, in East Palo Alto, so I've seen what's involved. It doesn't take money. It takes a handful of good teachers, a solid curriculum, and not much else. And it doesn't take a building. If you've been up to McKinney and seen that football stadium they have, good grief. How many kids could you teach to read if you didn't have a stadium that is larger than SMU's? So I may go back to Africa and do some more because, this is very frustrating watching this. I've watched it for I think 32 years now, and the union people in particular, these are really, really evil people, and I cannot talk about them here, but anyway, I'd love to bring the Africans here and do a network or do a cable TV show. We talked about that.
Carl? Oh, thank you, Russell.
That's it. Done.
One thing we did not talk about, I think we really need to look at the schools of education on our college and university campuses. That's another problem where it starts. We need to do better as far as our teachers, but without a doubt, I think that we need to look at, the words and the verbiage that empower and enable parents to make those choices for their children. And it comes back to, I think, educational freedom, not so much school choice, because as you all have seen up here, those two words mean 10 different things to everybody sitting up here. So I think we need to really first and foremost define what we're talking about, eliminate the government intrusion, which is how we got on this path in the first place.
All right, thanks. Hey, and I know the audience had some questions, but we're out of time. These folks will be here to answer questions, obviously, probably for a few minutes. Apologies for that, but thank you all so much for being here. We knew it was going to be an animated discussion, and it was, but also a really healthy one, I think. And so we'll see you all probably in April for Dallas City candidate forums. And please go to DallasExpress.com, sign up for free, and sign up for our emails. Thank you all.